Some years back, before we had our own deacon here at St. John's, I was trying to encourage folks to imagine having a deacon. And so I went to one of our neighboring congregations where they had two to see if I could borrow one once in a while. And that indeed worked out, so we had a deacon come on a few special occasions, particularly at Easter. And the next year I invited her to come again for Palm Sunday. And she said, "Nope, not gonna do it. Because it's year A in the lectionary. That's the year we read the Gospel of Matthew on Palm Sunday. And I boycott that service because I am never going to sit in church again and listen to people say, in the name of all the Jewish people, his blood be upon us and upon our children." Well, I couldn't really fault her. I knew where she was coming from. And ever since then, I have really thought a lot about those words in today's gospel reading. I think it's really important that we all think about them because of the way that they have been twisted over the years and used to justify theologically and legally the persecution of Jews by Christians. Many of the horrors that humanity has visited upon other human beings have taken that particular form. Now, I do think there is a way to read them in context, and that context has everything to do with what happened just before Matthew wrote this gospel, or whoever it was that wrote the gospel according to Matthew, whether he or she was named Matthew or not. And that is the great Jewish revolt that began in the year 66 and that ended in the year 70 with the Romans coming and having already slaughtered all kinds of other people. They laid siege to Jerusalem and eventually took it and slaughtered its inhabitants and burned down the temple. And in the aftermath of that, a kind of struggle that had already been underway to define the future of Judaism intensified. What will we be as a people? How will we worship God without our temple? Without our holy city? And one of the little factions, a very marginal, you might even say deviant little faction in this debate, was a few communities of men and women who said, well, the way that we are going to continue to worship God is through the presence of the Holy Spirit that comes to us through the Rabbi Jesus, who was crucified here in Jerusalem 40 years ago, and yet who lives, who was raised by God from the dead and appeared to us, and who lives in us now, and in whom we live. God's Son, the true Messiah of Israel, who came teaching wisdom and performing miraculous healings in God's name, and who came into Jerusalem just before the feast of the Passover, riding on a donkey, as had been prophesied by Zechariah, and who went into the temple and cast out the money changers and threw over their tables and pronounced judgment on those who treated it like a cash cow, and sat in the temple doing healings and teaching in a way that was incredibly courageous and confrontational toward the chief priests and the elders and the scribes of the people. And even to that emperor of Rome, about whom he said, "Give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, but give to God the things that are God's," which after all is everything. And then he was crucified. That's our Messiah. And our future as a people, our covenant with God, is now founded on him, on the death that he died, and on the life that he lives. Now, needless to say, there were a lot of people who didn't see it that way. What? So this peasant prophet from Nazareth of Galilee, who came into town 40 years ago and was crucified, is the Messiah? And the future of our people and of our religion is in him? Oh, and by the way, now that you in your communities are attracting Gentiles who are coming in, uncircumcised people who are worshiping with you in his name. A lot of people didn't see it that way, and in the controversy that communities like the one from which our Gospels and Matthew in particular emerged was a bitter one. And those who proclaimed Jesus as the Messiah found themselves as often as not driven out of the synagogue for professing this strange teaching. And so the Gospel of Matthew, which is in so many ways the most Jewish of all the Gospels, in which Jesus says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law and the prophets," that is, the Hebrew Scriptures, "but to fulfill them." Matthew, who continually cites episodes in the life of Jesus by reference to the Hebrew Scriptures as fulfilling this prophecy and that line of the Psalms. This Gospel of Matthew also contains this harsh polemic, this bitter kind of rhetoric directed toward the Pharisees and the elders and the chief priests and the scribes. And that's all, what happened. It's what happened. And I guess you could say it was harmless enough when it was being proclaimed and read and taught in a marginalized, oppressed community somewhere on the fringes of one of the cities of the Eastern Roman Empire. But when that same religion 300 years later is embraced by the Roman Empire, a text like, "His blood be upon us and upon our children," which Matthew may have intended as a way of saying, see, the Romans came and destroyed Jerusalem and slaughtered you all. Maybe that was God's way of settling the score with you for killing Jesus. Well, that text in the hands of imperial power becomes something else entirely, doesn't it? This past week, Pope Francis, the Bishop of Rome, publicly declared that the doctrine of discovery, which was promulgated back in the 15th century when Western Christendom was still unified before our little English Reformation tradition got going. So it was promulgated for us, which said that the Christian empires of Western Europe, Spain and Portugal in particular, were justified in expanding into Africa and into the Americas and in taking the land away from the people who lived there and enslaving them because they were not Christian. And that same doctrine was incorporated into the legal tradition of the newly fledged United States of America in a series of Supreme Court rulings in the first decades after our revolution, cited the doctrine of discovery as justification for taking land away from the native inhabitants of this continent. They had no right to it, which we as descendants of those European empires for whom the doctrine of discovery was promulgated by the church had any obligation to respect. His blood be upon us and upon our children. So when the Pope says that that doctrine was an error and is not the teaching of the universal church, it kind of leaves us with the possibility that these last 500 years of European imperial and colonial expansion and dispossession and enslavement of dark-skinned peoples is not a great adventure of glorious discovery and noble Christianization, but a vast ecological and genocidal crime. There's only one innocent person in this story that we read today. Not the disciples of Jesus, not Pontius Pilate, much as he might pretend to be innocent. Obviously not the soldiers who followed his orders, not the elders and the chief priests who conspired to have him handed over and crucified. There's only one innocent person in this story. And that innocent person who taught that those who live by the sword will perish by the sword, who said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are those who suffer and are accused of all kinds of evil things for my sake." The one who said, "On one basis the nations will be judged. When I return in glory and sit upon my throne at last as ruler over history. When I came to you and I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was naked, did you clothe me? When I was in prison, did you visit me?" His blood be upon us and upon our children. When he sits at table with his disciples for one last time, and he passes around the cup of wine, he says, "This is my blood of the covenant." And back when Moses came down from the mountain and told the people of Israel that God had chosen them to be his covenant people, and he declared to them the commandments of God and said, "Will you abide by these laws? Will you accept the responsibility that comes with your special status as those chosen by me to demonstrate my justice to all the nations of the world?" They say, "Yes, we'll do it." And Moses sacrifices an animal and sprinkles them with the blood that ratifies that covenant. It's never too late, my friends. Never too late for us to enter into the covenant of the crucified. His blood be upon us and upon our children.